is Isabel Gomez. I'm part of the NGO's managing board, and I have the pleasure to be the moderator for this next panel. And we're going to talk about the measuring circularity in cradle to cradle. And yeah, we have three great panelists, which I will briefly introduce now. And then we just start chatting here on stage. The sound? But do you understand me? Okay, perfect. So on my left, the gentleman in light blue is Alexander Meyer zum Felde, partner and associate director from Boston Consulting Group, where he is leading the group's global work on waste systems, on circular economy, on deposit systems since 2010. And you're also responsible for managing BCG's relationship with MIT Sloan on sustainability and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And prior to BCG, you worked at Goldman Sachs in New York. Then in the middle, we do have Nono Leermakers. I hope I'm pronouncing that somehow correctly. She's a project manager at EPEA, at EPEA Benelux, an industrial designer with a master's degree in the field of sustainable cities, focused on circular material flows like building materials. And at her work at EPEA, Nono applies the cradle-to-cradle framework on a broad range of projects, working towards products, materials, buildings, cities, and systems with a positive impact, with a positive footprint. And the gentleman in black is Charles van Reij, the global lead for packaging, paper, and printing at the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, with a lifetime experience in the packaging industry, where you have been working at multinationals in the value chain of flexible packaging, from basic polymers to packaging concepts. So welcome on stage. I'm very, very happy to be able to talk to you. I would like to start with a question for all of you, because I would like to know how you measure cradle to cradle and circularity in your specific fields, in your specific work areas. And maybe you can just briefly, each of you, take us on this journey, how you start the process, how you proceed, and what exactly you focus on in your work. And I don't know, maybe Charles, you would like to start, and then we go Nono and then Alex?
Yeah, hello. Hello, yep, can you hear me? Yeah, we tried to do this we discussed to do this in German, but I have only my German, I didn't have any education in it, but only from the Programme mit die Maus habe ich Deutsch gelernt, so that's not the technical knowledge. Yes, we, from Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute, we measure products on safety, circularity, and if it is produced in a responsible way. If we assess a product, we assess the product on sourcing, then on design, and on the system. And sourcing means that we look at the level of renewable material or recycled material which is in the product. On design, we look on the level of the material, how it's built up. Is it a biological circle or is it a mechanical circle? So that's the way on a certain level it can be recycled, and it's also how it is designed, so that you really can, in the stream, can recycle it. And that then you come in the system where we analyze to avoid, we have a product which is 100% recyclable, but will not be recycled. So what the case there is that we look at the level, if there is a kind of infrastructure or connection already in place, what will take care now or in the future that it can be recycled. And also the education of people who use it, that it comes in a proper way back for recycling.
Yes. Yes. Does it work? Yeah, it works. Perfect. We at EPEA also make use of these ways of measuring. We also look into the sourcing and the cyclability of a product, actually. We, for example, communicate this by a materials passport, in which we say, okay, this is the amount of recycled or renewable content. These are the pathways that the product can follow after its use. But what we also do is we put a lot of focus on the material health aspects of recycled and renewable content. We often see that in circularity, it's quite a broad term. It's used all over the place. And we think it's very important to define what materials are used in a product, and also define, well, if you have virgin materials, that's a bit easier, because then you can track where the material is coming from and how it is made. But with recycled materials, we often don't know. So we really think that it's important to emphasize this material health aspect of recycled and renewable content. So yeah, that's really a focus at EPEA where we work on.
In this case, it's quite unique. I think BCG has the advantage. We're helping our clients and customers to think through, how do you set up a circularity strategy? Which KPIs do you use? Which metrics do you use in order to take the right informed decisions as a management team? And in that, there's many different type of systems and metrics out there. One of the large challenges is it's not being harmonized, and it's not a standard set of metrics like the Paris Agreement you have on the climate side for the material side and for closing the loop. So what we did a couple of years ago, because we were struggling with our clients to set up the right set of metrics and KPIs, we actually looked at all the existing ones. So Cradle to Cradle is one. There's Circulytics for packaging and plastics from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There's CTI, which is Circular Transition Indicators from WBCSD, and many more. And we actually started to look at what are the same metrics all of them are using. And we developed, it's called BCG Circaligence, really thinking through that you can report as a business or as a company into all of those frameworks, depending on which ones you choose, but to harmonize your data and metrics. And what's quite interesting is they all follow a very similar pattern. So you always need to look at the input. So what kind of materials are you using? How much are they maybe already blended in components and these kind of things? Then the design element, which you can control within your company borders or with your supply chain, and we should talk about supply cycles in the future instead of chains here. Then the whole part around production circles. How do you close the loop in water treatment, for example, in waste management, in your facilities and so on, but also around the energy part. Then it comes to the business model and usage, and that's usually very challenging because that's beyond company borders. Nonetheless, by your business models, by the incentive schemes you're setting, you're also setting a scheme for your customers eventually. And then last but not least, obviously, the whole part on the reuse, resell, refurbishment, and eventually at its end of useful life, the repurposement and recycling. And when you follow this, it's actually interesting. There's more than 100 metrics out there, and question to management is always, what KPIs do I use to steer and to make the right decisions? And I think this is just simply where a lot of businesses struggle. No one gets up in the morning and says, I want to destroy the planet. I mean, a couple of people do, but not many. But where do you start? Do you start on the material health side? Do you start on circulating from products that are already in place, taking some of these bags? How do you set a price on recycled content? Yeah? How do you ensure the right quality? And that's really, really challenging to do. And then if you have a metric set that's not harmonized, that's different in every country and jurisdiction, it actually gets very, very challenging for the implementation.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because Cradle is in itself, of course, a qualitative design framework. With measuring stuff, we're very much on the quantitative side. So what we really want to do also in our projects is to define KPIs and actually look first, okay, what do we want to achieve in terms of quality? If we look at energy, then we can, of course, work on the efficiency of systems, but that's not the goal. If we first want to see, okay, what type of energy are we going to use, and then we can further do measurements on all the systems that we use. But first see, okay, what do we want to achieve on the qualitative side, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah, and also regarding to the level of recycling, we also measure the level of recycling. We have a starting point, and we measure them in categories. So for a specific product, we have different product groups. We have targets, and you can achieve that from bronze till platinum. So we challenge companies, when you come in, you achieve bronze. We challenge them to get to a higher level in the next review. So that's also how we challenge them and also push them to get to a higher sustainable level.
Yeah, you already mentioned a couple of more criterion which are like core of the cradle to cradle, not only design concept, but also the school of thought. Circularity, material health, water and soil stewardship, renewable energy. There is also the social factor along the supply chains. How do you ensure that your customers really approach this topic with a holistic angle? Is it difficult to convince them? Is it easy? Because it's a lot to take into account.
So I would start, it's generally easy to convince businesses to start doing better and to have the ambition. It's really challenging when you look at what does it mean in terms of implementation and eventually, and let's also be honest, the business case. And that's the challenge. I think that's the beauty of circularity, and especially on cradle to cradle, you're rethinking systems, which is amazing, which is fun, but really hard to do on a daily operational basis. If you come to the questions on what do you prioritize, in business, it starts to be a trade-off decision. And I think we've really mastered cradle to cradle when it's not trade-off decisions anymore or any longer. I want to be very explicit, though, on social part, because I mean, I'm leading circularity globally, and we often have a very westernized type of perspective. I want to share an example from Indonesia. If you're a large packaging firm, take Nestle, Unilevers, and the likes, you're putting out products on the market, mostly in plastics packaging, that does not necessarily get collected. Best case, it does get collected and then ends up in landfill. There's very little recycling. So there's a lot of discussions, should you put in recycling facilities in Indonesia? The first reaction would be, yes, most definitely, we need to circulate the materials, no doubt about it. If you're a Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, whatever, Nestle Water, you want to get access to PET flakes because you have those targets out there. Okay, let's put in sorting facilities because we're collecting that waste, we're driving it out to a landfill in Jakarta, we're putting it through sorting facilities, we're recycling PET flakes like we do in the Western world. Bam, we're putting out 50,000 people out of a job. It's jobs we might not want to acknowledge we want to keep because those are waste scavengers, they are going onto landfills every day. It's definitely not a healthy working environment, but it suddenly becomes a very, very challenging question on what do you prioritize? Are you going to take the investment, or are you going to be prioritizing closing the loop and taking the materials and keeping the materials in the loop? And eventually find other types of employment for those people? Or do you actually keep those jobs because for local economy currently it's necessary, but you're not solving on the environmental side? I'm not saying the one is right or wrong, but I also want to be explicit here. Those are decisions that businesses need to take on their own, and that's already the advanced businesses because they have some kind of responsibility, brand out there, and so on. So it's not that easy, and there is no right or wrong. Obviously, once we come to the idea we're designing products from a cradle-to-cradle lens and we're putting infrastructure and circular chains into the world, we eventually overcome those challenges. But if I'm taking as a management team that decision tomorrow and I'm putting in a sorting facility and I'm putting 50,000 people out of a job versus I'm actually keeping those jobs and I'm incentivizing them and maybe paying a little bit more, it is a trade-off decision. And that's really, really challenging to take those.
Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I have the same, and I think when we come back and look at the 3 principles of cradle to cradle, then it's always a challenge to keep them all in balance. I mean, you cannot make a trade-off. You should, when you source materials, you know, maybe it's a very healthy material, it's recycled, I don't know. But then you, of course, should also make sure that it's made in a responsible way. So yeah, we have a really close look on balancing these 3 principles at the same time, which is a challenge, but necessary. Yeah,
I think you should embrace all the sustainable steps we make and all initiatives. But also we should not make it too complex in a lot of things. We should really make it not that companies are afraid to step in. I mean, sometimes when companies reach out to us and say, well, I have to go through a whole this process. Yes, but I think, and also the systems, maybe it's also that it's depending on the typical branch you are in. But in some cases, where there's a lot of volume, you don't want to carry it around of the world. You know, you want to start up the system close and create a closed loop close to, and then the economies will drive it to more to bigger systems. But get a start and work from there.
Yeah, and I think if we collect all the information on the circularity side, but also on a material health perspective, I mean, if we evaluate all those products, materials, then we dive into the supply chain and we go to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I mean, it goes on and on. But then at the same time, of course, we also collect the social data and assess it on that. So that's, of course, parallel to what we do with the other topics within the framework. Yes.
Yeah. Talking about a complex concept, is there a huge difference between measuring circularity and cradle to cradle at small, medium-sized, and large corporation? And if yes, what's the main difference?
First of all, I think the complexity of the product is leading. I mean, you have simple products and complex products, and that makes a huge difference. What you see, that big organizations have more resources, have more people. They can have put specific people on a job, and they have also more developed and more created a lot of data. Smaller companies, which are more flexible, can in sometimes be positive. But I think there are some difference. Yes. So it is the kind of professionality with flexibility, and yeah, that's my view.
And I would agree. I think it depends by industry and product more than it does depend by size. There is leading large companies, there's lagging large companies, there's leading small companies, there's lagging small companies. What I think is interesting, and that's eventually what it comes to, why are you measuring? Large companies are quite often measuring for reporting. They have legal compliance requirements. And if I'm using the data to report on something I'm not acting upon, it's a cost to business, period. The companies that play it really smart are the ones thinking about how do we use this information, how do we use the data, how do we get smarter on it to improve our products, to improve our services, to improve our repair, maintenance, refurbishment services as such. How do we turn that into business value? And I think that's the larger difference on measuring. How are you using the data and information? There is simply an overload on data and information that's required. That's the first part. The second part to that question is, I think there's even a bigger gap between what is business measuring and why are they measuring versus what should we be measuring as society. And I just think this is a huge gap we need to overcome. Yeah? And Cradle to Cradle has the big benefit of being holistic, and it's not looking at recycling. It's not looking at just material health. It's really looking at the systemic transformation. But we need to overcome this discussion from, I mean, as society, we need to repurpose our materials. We want to live with healthy materials. And it's insane how we are treating the planet as of now, right? I mean, less than 8% is circular, blah, blah, blah. That's a societal perspective. If I'm now looking at businesses, I'm still putting out products into the market that people buy. And yes, I can make them a little bit better. Yes, I can think about how I'm investing upstream, downstream. But in the end, if the majority pays a certain price for a product, there will always be someone who does it cheaper, faster, and worse than me. And I think that's really the part where we need to overcome this translation. What do we want as society, and how do we incentivize businesses? And also, how do we regulate and mandate some of these things, yeah, in order for business to move into more the societal lens?
Yeah, I'd like to come back to your first point. I think, well, the quantitative measures, as we just talked about, shouldn't be a goal in itself. We do this for a certain purpose, namely that we want to improve quality. So again, the quality and the C2C framework, that's super important. What I do think is, I agree that I think small and small companies, SMEs, have sometimes no capacity or less capacity to do the measures. So I think there should be a way of standardization that they can easily hop on and deliver this data as soon as this is required. What I do see is that with these SMEs, we have very interesting projects because they are able to do most often a bit quicker the pilots and the tests, and they get the first results out, which they can take further. So I think they have a really good advantage there. So that's super interesting also. But in terms of measuring, I think, yeah, there should be maybe a standardization that helps them and to do this more quickly, because it's not a goal in itself.
Should there also be a standardization and criterion for public procurement? Because I'm thinking, if you say we need incentives, we do this with the goal of a holistic transformation of how we think about production, about consumption, about products. Public procurement is such a huge lever because it's billions and billions of market volume. The things cities are buying. Does it differ? Is it different to measure circularity in a company to measuring the public procurement, for example, of the city of Berlin? Is that already happening? Do you have experience? How could we envision this process? Do you have any suggestions, ideas?
I'm going to start and you chime in. So many questions at once. Is it already started? So first of all, yes, public procurement needs to play a role, especially, I mean, we learn building materials and construction, that is public procurement that can actually move the needle. But I want to go beyond just that. There is examples, city of Venlo, I think in Holland, actually redesigned and refurbished some of their buildings according to cradle-to-cradle principles. That obviously helps the cause, yeah? But it's still not fast enough. France just released a directive that forces every DAX equivalent business, so every stock-listed major company in France, to purchase a certain percentage of their purchases under circularity standards. So for example, if you're taking IT equipment, cell phones, laptops, blah, 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 you need to have, don't quote me, I think it's 25 or 35, depending on product, % of that as refurbished or repaired devices. They're simply not there in the market. But every laptop, cell phone company is now trying to scramble all the old devices and refurb them, because otherwise you're out of that procurement contract. And so it's not only about the direct sources, it's also about smart incentives and regulation. And incentives doesn't always mean it needs to be a mandate, yeah, or it needs to be forced upon you. It can also be these kind of incentive schemes that you need to ramp up hurdles. You're setting up systems. Suddenly it's attractive to recollect devices. And I think in that sense, yes, regulation will help. And I know, I mean, business will probably tell me don't ask for more regulation, yeah, which is also true because they are reporting like hell and data and so on. But it's about smart regulation. It's really about not putting additional burdens and just tracking data and information just for the purpose of tracking them, but really thinking about what moves the needle, what creates impact, how do I shift systems, and public procurement or guidelines around sourcing requirements can certainly help and accelerate some of those transitions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what we see is that currently it does not really align with the principles of cradle to cradle in regulations. So companies really have the perception that these are the right things to work towards, but they're actually using the wrong parameters. And we really think that it should be informed by the C2C framework. For example, a very important example is that material health is often not included to the extent that Cradle to Cradle is looking at that, especially if we look at recycled content. If regulations ask for a certain amount of recycled content in a product, then they do not take into account the material health aspect. So that's really a gap. We also see that, or we saw in a recent report actually, that the presence of hazardous chemicals and recycled materials prevent currently the upscaling of the circular economy. That was a report called What Goes Around by the NGO of ChemSec. That's so important. If we, for example, look at an example of a bicycle path that is made out of recycled bottles and cups, then that is super nice with the best intentions, but in a way that will can cause a harm, for example, for the water flows. There can be micropollutants. So it's not, we use those materials, but they are not designed for that specific purpose. Another example is the bamboo crockery, what's now often in the stores. Super nice, renewable content, but if that is combined with melamine, formaldehyde, then it's not healthy at all. So we should really look into the material health aspects, and I think this is, to a large extent, currently missing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to go back a bit about companies who are, what is driving also a lot of change. You see that in many cases we have brand owners who really taking it up because they want to protect their brand and they want to avoid that do greenwashing. So they pulling it actually. And then you see commoditized products like packaging. There is this drive not there. You see all kinds of initiatives to downsize, to change the monomaterials, but the real drive will coming from legislations because it's what's going to. So the packaging and packaging waste regulations is very effective for this sector. So and that's what I believe. If you are more in commodity areas, then you need more legislations. Otherwise, you got people afraid with brands to damage their reputation.
And if I just may add on that PPWR, or packaging and packaging waste regulation, this is going to be super exciting to see, because it's not only about make your plastic packaging recyclable, do collect it or recycle it. There is, and I think it's kind of for the first time, there is numbers in there that mandate reusability in some of these packaging things. And that's going to disrupt business models. If you are putting out plastic packaging on the market today, you're incentivized by volume, period. Maybe a little bit by quality, but mostly by volume. If now 50% of your market is supposed to be reusable, it suddenly drastically reduces the volume available, and you need to think about, how do I collect stuff? How do I use crates? So last time I think IFCO was on stage here, which is an amazing example where you actually basically still use plastics, but you create reusable crates. So you're setting up an ecosystem where these things are being collected, washed, cleaned, and recircled 100, 120 times, and then, if it breaks or whatever, actually repurposed in exactly the same product as it was before. And this is the first time that regulation is going much more holistically in circularity, still not fully under cradle-to-cradle ideas, but I think it's the first step in the right direction. And it's going to be very interesting to watch how it's going to be implemented, how quickly it's going to be implemented, and eventually how it will be controlled. Because already the first countries like Austria are now announcing, well, and we're just going to pay a fine if we don't get there and stuff like this. So it's going to be very interesting, but I think this is really, really cool to watch, to see how also regulators are understanding slowly but surely that we don't only need to regulate recycled content and these things, but need to go further into true circular type of models.
And this will also, this packaging and packaging waste regulation will also affect us as a consumer, because probably in the retail we will see changes, because some products with multi-layers or they have to present their products in a different way. So it's very interesting. It's also technically very much challenging.
But wouldn't it be even nicer if we started before that, maybe by regulating REACH according to cradle, because basically PVC in packaging solutions is still allowed. PFAS are still not banned. What would your suggestion be to the European Commission when it comes to REACH? Because I mean that's the core, that's the basis of every material, of every product we produce.
Yeah, I don't know why certain products still are allowed. I think there's a big lobby behind it or something. And yeah, that's, I don't know how to tackle that. That's done in Brussels, and I know there are. I heard something about an enormous amount of people who are doing lobby there around there. So it's they do a good job in this area then. And it's a lot of companies who have invested a lot of millions in an industry, and I don't want to see it moving from that. So it's the economy is also something behind it, and shareholders' value.
Yeah. How do you change that mindset when you talk to your customers? So to get them to a point where they understand that cradle-to-cradle circularity and also measuring it to know where they're going. It's not just costs. It's securing their future business model. Do they understand that? How do you convince them of this?
First question, do they understand it? Often, yes. But there's a reality to it. Again, yeah, I'm not saying that's good, but there is a reality out there. I think more and more people start to understand it. It's still very complex, especially if you then go into cradle to cradle, which is even more complex than the simpler concept of we need to close the loop. They do understand that. The best way, and now I'm talking mainly on the business side here, admittedly, the best way to convince them is twofold. The first one and the easiest one is show them the business case. As stupid as it sounds, if you have companies like Schüco here on stage that do produce products on this and they do get a premium, they do win contracts, that incentivizes and moves business. So you need to have a clear business case. And by business case, I do not mean immediately it needs to be less cost or so. I want to give you an example from the textile production where we actually did a cradle-to-cradle certified t-shirt. The materials were actually much more expensive, but you did save so much cost in the processing because you'd be saving processing times, you'd be saving cleanup, you'd be reducing waste cost and these kind of things, that overall there was a business case to simply do it, right? To me, the question is rather, how do we scale those and make those better known? That's the second part on conviction. The third one, and I think that's an emotional one, we need to simplify our messages. There's way too many messages around sustainability. It's getting way too complex. We've heard earlier, also in Germany, some of the regulation was actually meant well, yeah, but completely derailed the discussion because it was getting too complex. And simplifying the messages is really, really important. We need to get the people, everyone understands there's a limit on resources on the planet. If we don't stop or if we don't change the way we change things, we will simply not have that in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And then you need to go into the details. But we are quite often starting way too complex on messaging. We're trying to convince you need to do 100 things at the same time. And people don't listen. So first thing, business cases, show them. Secondly, very clear and easy messages.
Easy covering the complexity then. And I totally agree. I think or at least what you said about defining what circularity actually means and what we want to achieve in terms of quality is really the first step. I mean, it's such a broad term now, like sustainability, circularity is becoming as broad as that. We don't know what we mean with that. Is it on recycled content? Is it on designing materials that they can go through their use phase and follow the pathway actually that you had in mind when you designed it? I mean, all these things, we have to define what we actually mean with circularity, and then we can move forward, hopefully with the simplicity. But that's step one, I think, yes.
Circularity, you cannot drive as a company alone. You have to do it with your suppliers, with the retailer, or with your clients, and but also with your competitors. And I think it's important that people understand. I think if you now take the lead as a company and team up with some competitors and you open it up, it is very difficult because everybody has a company to run, and yeah, there are some conflicts, you know. You don't want to give your recipe, but if you work together in those things and you start there and you get trust with each other, I think you really can make a difference and get a competitive advantage in a certain area. So I really believe that companies would start and jump in now and mobilize the value chain with some competitors. They can also put on the legislations, because then they show how it works. So yeah, I would say do this and be ahead of legislations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because as of now, most companies are in competition with each other, even with some of their suppliers in some specific areas of their work. So does that mean that we maybe also should measure the success, how we define a company's success differently from now? Is that also a part of cradle to cradle and circularity from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, for example, we have clients in the printing industry, and printing industry is suffering a lot of price increases. We have Printer Change Initiative, which is a group of printers who work together. They exchange their information, and I think this is a very good example of how the way forward. But what you see, the organization is not growing rapidly because of the companies around them. They are afraid of sharing knowledge, and I think they should reach contact and work together on it, because you're driving your whole industry to a higher level, and you're making legislations because policymakers look at it and they see it as an example. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, and to come back to your question, I think we definitely should celebrate the successes. Cradle to Cradle is also about having a lot of fun, so I definitely think that, and that will also inform our future design decisions. I mean, it will also be a basis. We measure things. We say, okay, this can be done better, and this is the way we're going to do it. So, yeah, we should definitely look at these successes and determine next steps based on that. Yes.
Is this a realistic vision going forward, especially when we're talking about like really huge corporations?
I would hope so, yeah. And we all need to believe in it, because otherwise we can stop trying to change. But there's a reality, and I was just at the IAA in Munich, and when you walk around there, you have the feeling we've already mastered the energy transition. It was incredible. Out of, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of different cars, many Chinese, I was blown away by how many new Chinese brands there were, all electrified. It's quite interesting. So yes, we need to celebrate, we need to showcase that some of these things work. At the same time, there's a reality out there. And that's the same for circularity. I think circularity is now getting well more recognized. It is in some legislation. We're tracking every year how the total mass balance and volume have changed, and it's actually going in the wrong direction. We are recirculating less materials. We're actually, if you're looking at the recycling grades, yes, there's always 100 tons here, 1,000 tons there, and whatever, yeah? On good quality grades, on fully circular and then tested and healthy materials and all of this, but that's minuscule to the volumes we're using up as a society. And I think we need to celebrate successes. We need to especially incentivize the successes way more. But we also need to be true to ourselves and honest. We need a significant accelerator in the transition. And for the last 10 years, I've supported clients and businesses on collaborations. We've set up, literally in every industry you can think of, collaborations, and they know what they would need to do along the value chain, and then reality hits and someone in procurement sourcing writes out the new contract. Design has designed material or products for X years and is still incentivized by cost, by efficiency of supply security and these kind of things, yeah? And that's how change doesn't happen. And I think especially in larger businesses, and that's why I think change will come from startup, from smaller, medium enterprises, they are just way more innovative and quicker to change and adjust, and they are easier to find their differentiation potential in the circularity space. For large companies, it can only come twofold, either from the financial markets or from regulation. And if you think that through, financial markets also on this are not moving as quickly. So we need the regulation on this. And I think to get to a true circularity, we will not be able to get there without any significant regulation.
You want to add something? Okay. I would ask the audience if you have any questions for our panelists, because then we have our, If you just could state your name and company or organization, that would be great.
Hello, hello. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much for a highly engaged panel and addressing all the intricacies involved. My name is Nicholas. I work in policy and I now study a public policy master's degree, so it's highly important for me when you talk about regulation. I've got two questions. One is on the messages. Do you perhaps have an example from your experience on one of these simple messages that could change the narrative? And another one is on organizational design, because you talked about shareholder value and how every company is embedded in their perspective on this. So are you aware of an organizational form that incentivizes success evaluation more towards cradle to cradle? And how do you encourage this in the work with your current customers? Thanks.
I couldn't hear the first one.
You couldn't understand?
It's hard to hear on stage, admittedly. So the first question was on the messaging, if I caught that correctly. What's a clear message? I just want to give you a couple of examples. We're extracting as society 100 billion tons of materials every year from the planet. That is 1.5 times what the planet can renew, and we are only using about 5% of that as reused or secondary materials. That's a very, very easy message. That's numbers that stick. My favorite one is in 1 ton of cell phones, there's 100 times more gold than in 1 ton of gold ore today. Yet, we are mining the gold ore and we're letting the cell phones go to waste. Those are messages that stick. Yeah? That's stuff that you can discuss. We need to start with this. And if you then send the message, we can't continue doing this. We need to rethink how we circulate materials. And I acknowledge that's still not by far cradle to cradle. Yeah? But it's a starting point. That's how we need to get people. And that's how people start understanding we need to change behaviors. And you can do that in every value chain. If you go into textiles, you're saying we're producing, I think it's about 125 million tons of textiles and garments every single year. Yeah? About 20% of those never see a customer and go directly to waste. That's insane, right? And those are catchy messages you can find for every industry, but we need to bring those out. We need to create that awareness. And then we can start the discussion on how do you get there? What are the steps? How do you incentivize those? It's not only about recirculating them. It's about the whole part on how do we design them, which materials do we use, how do we create healthy materials that are not hazardous to you. And some of the examples that Michael gave in the morning, they were really catchy. They were brilliant, right? But this is really how we need to start the discussion.
I think the second question was about the changes within the organizations, right?
Yeah, the shareholder values is actually, till my belief, in a lot of companies still leading. There's a lot of statements done that they're going to be, especially in packaging. I know that companies say they were going to be changed to mono packaging or other kind of solution. Sometimes the technical solution is not there. Sometimes they might will, but the system is not in place. And I don't know how it works with different companies, what kind of incentives there, but I come from a packaging industry and I sell a lot of tons of plastics, and you got, I don't know how they change that, because you cannot say, well, let's try to sell less, so because we have investment done, so the company has extruders running and they have to run 24/7. So yes, I think there is this, what they say, they don't walk the talk, I think. And sorry, but I don't want to attack the industry, because I love the industry and it's very innovative. But I think there will be some business models will fall down, despite investments which have been done.
And Dodo knows this. I sometimes teach classes also at universities. I always start with a slide which basically shows an empty planet, and it says, for a beautiful moment in time, we created maximal shareholder value. We just simply destroyed the planet. And so I think this already shows a little bit the trade-off here. I sincerely believe, though, we need to change society-wise how we track success and how we measure shareholder value on the one hand, but it's happening now. If you have regulation like PPWR, yeah, which enforces the industry to put on reusable containers and packaging on the market, if you are a single-use type of plastic producer for that specific one, you're gone, period. And that is also shareholder value if you think about how you're transforming your business to sustain value not only in short term but also in midterm perspective. Automotive is another example, right? I mean, Tesla was valued higher than I think the next 5, 6, 7 OEMs in the world, despite putting out 1% of the cars on the road for a time. This gives you an indication. It's by no means is it perfect, yeah, but sustainability, broader, also the climate discussion, starts being priced into shareholder value. And I think the businesses that succeed to manage and embed sustainability, be it climate, be it circularity, but also be it the social component, especially in other parts of the world, be it DEI topics and so on, they do have a higher valuation already today partially and even further going forward. So it's still not going to be fast enough, but there is a link between shareholder value and actually moving into ESG and sustainability topics.
Any other questions from the audience? There's another one.
Hello, yeah, thank you very much. I'm Linda, I work for the efficiency agency in NR. Can you hear me? Because you're...
Can you do it without the microphone?
I think it's probably better without the microphone because we really have difficulties.
Yeah, okay, then I try to speak very loud. Yeah, I'm Linda, I work for the efficiency agency in NRW, and we have the environmental ministry there. And we've talked a lot about how to measure like the recycling content, and we really find it very challenging to measure like the change of product design or business models that support the circularity. How do you deal with that?
Very good question. Now I can start again. As I said, there is different metrics out there. The business model is still fairly easy. It's not. It might not be a perfect, satisfying metric, but in the end, you can look at revenues or profitability and these kind of business metrics. Or value created based on circular services. So when we talk to businesses, we're using that rather simplified metrics of looking at how much value do you do from after-sales services, repair, refurbishment, recirculated type of products, and so on. So the business model is still, I would say, doable or a little bit easier. On design, it gets super challenging. There's a couple of, especially from packaging and plastics, couple of frameworks out there. SWIR framework, for example, from WBCSD is one. What you do measure mostly is still recyclability, which in a cradle-to-cradle world is by far not sufficient. Yeah? And it leads to, I don't want to say greenwashing, and I'm not going to name brands right now, but there's a couple of companies that claim 100% recyclability of their products. They have demonstrated that in some kind of small volume technology things where they invested 100 million. It will never be scaled. Yeah? The sorting facilities don't accept it. The best example is if you have biodegradable type of textiles. No composting facility across Europe would per se accept those, even bioplastics, all this stuff, because simply the risk of getting microplastics in your products like soil is way too high rather than sorting it out and incinerating it. So I think there is, on design, it is challenging. Yeah? Most of those metrics I'd be very cautious because they measure recyclability. They do not measure the actual circularity.
No, that's your core business.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that. Yeah, so if we look from a design perspective, we of course have the creative framework as a design framework. So what we really do is we assess it based on the fact, is it designed in a way that it can cycle the defined pathways that you determined beforehand, and is it safe for these pathways, and can we actually reuse it? So I think these pathways are really the core, and you're right that or design is of course so broad, and it will be for packaging, it will mean something different than it will be for I don't know, chairs or whatever. And I think that's also the strength of the framework. Like you can adapt it or you can use it for every product in a way that it reaches the most quality, actually, or the highest quality. And I think these pathways are really the core. It is true that it's hard to measure it quantitatively because it's that's less applicable, I think. But it really is evaluated in a way like, did we design it in the right way for the right pathway, and can it actually cycle it? Is there a system or an infrastructure that will facilitate that? That's the way, ideally, we'd like to assess it. Yes.
Yeah, design fit for recycling. So.
All right, so we're running a bit out of time. I would like to ask one last question to you. What's the easiest product to measure according to Cradle, from your point of view, your experience?
Oh, I think that's a really hard one, because if we think this will be an easy product, then eventually it's not.
Or the hardest, maybe. Maybe that's easier.
Let me think about that.
Charles.
The most difficult one.
The most difficult one?
I think we recently certified a B&O speaker, which is quite complex, and I think it's really complex.
The Bang & Olufsen, the
Bang &
very pricey speaker.
And it's I think it's a great achievement. So they're really committed to Cradle. They're a great example of, they're ahead of a lot. Yeah.
Nono, did you think of something? Or Alex, maybe you?
So I guess the answer you'd expect is the less materials are in a product, the easier, the more complex the product is, the more content it has, the more challenging. I would like to take a slightly different way here, though. I would say every product is equally easy or challenging to measure under the cradle-to-cradle idea, because in the end you need to break it down to the base materials at the beginning. And every material in every product of this world is theoretically recyclable, reusable, if we design the product in between as we need to. And so I would actually argue there is likely no manufactured or engineered product that could not be cradle to cradle.
Yeah, but in practice it's a bit different.
Well, I know, and I've been the one saying here's the reality, but if we already give up the vision now and say, for example, cradle to cradle for cars, which is a super complex product, you have more than 10,000 suppliers, probably even more like 30,000 suppliers for a product. Imagine the data and the challenge it takes to certify, to go through every single of the materials. But if we already kind of acknowledge today it's not possible for these type of products, I don't really see the vision forward. And so I know in reality it takes
That was not the question.
It takes more people, for you guys to assess a car than it does take for a monomaterial type of textile or so. But at the same time, I think the idea of cradle to cradle really need to stick, and we shouldn't exclude any products or industry from the beginning on because they have the exclusion of it's more complex. I really think we need to apply this across every product, every material we're using.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say that the easiest products to work with are the products that are defined. And that is not, I don't mean that these are already optimized products or good products. It's at least the best start to start optimizing. So we know a lot about the product, about the materials. It's very easy for us then to guide it in a way to a cradle-to-cradle product. As long as there is no defined material in, then it's super hard to go on.
But it's still possible.
It's still possible, yeah.
As we just agreed. So thank you very much, Alex, Nono, and Charles. I hope you learned something and can take something with you. Thanks for listening. And we are staying here. Michael Kellner is already here, Parliamentary State Secretary in the Bundesministerium für Wirtschaft und Klimaschutz. Yeah, have fun this day and hope to see you tomorrow as well here. Thank you.